play it any louder, then it's getting shut down.
My name is Waffles, and I'm a government whistleblower turned political commentator, and this is the last 24 hours in the news. Today is October 30th, 2025. It is 10:30 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. Here are the top U.S. news highlights for the past 24 hours. The White House filed an emergency application asking the U.S. Supreme Court to allow the president to remove the Register of Copyrights, Shira Perlmutter, after lower courts blocked a unilateral firing. This is a direct live test of presidential removal authority over an independent official and could reshape administrative law precedents. Coalition of states suing over SNAP pause. A 25-state coalition of governors and AGs filed suit in the federal court to force the USDA to release funds for November SNAP benefits amid the federal shutdown. They argue withholding funds violates statute and risks hunger for millions. The case raises immediate governance and statutory compliance stakes. National Guard quick reaction units for civil disturbances ordered. The Pentagon and White House directive will require rapid response National Guard forces in each state trained to respond to civil disturbances. Units equals 500 troopers per state to be operational by early 2026. The policy escalates the federal posture towards domestic mobilization and is already provoking pushback and legal scrutiny in cities with pending litigation. Court fights over deployments remain live. Chicago, Portland, and others. Appeals court activity and rehearings continue over prior deployments and restraining orders. The mixed federal appellate rulings mean operational posture can change quickly if courts issue new emergency stays or reversals. No large new mass deployment was announced in the last 24 hours, but litigation track keeps a rapid mobilization risk alive. Domestic extremist threat environment unchanged but monitored. Federal analysts and law enforcement briefings continue to list far-right and militia-style violent threats as principal domestic risks. No verified new large-scale extremist incident was reported overnight. Administration threats, pressure against civilians or political figures. The administration has used funding withholding, conditional grant language, and public threats as levers, e.g. SNAP funding pause. Those tools are subject of lawsuits and political pushback. Courts are now adjudicating those claims. Potential precedent-setting expansion of executive control. If the Supreme Court grants an emergency removal petition, it will broaden presidential authority to remove certain officials in independent or quasi-independent positions, a change that could ripple across rulemaking, enforcement, and institutional safeguards. Immediate risk to public services from shutdown decisions, the SNAP funding pause, and related decisions not to draw contingency funds creates short-term risk to food security and reimbursements that support hospitals and public health programs. Multiple state lawsuits frame this as an imminent well-being threat. Local region outages and infrastructure strain. Utilities in several regions, notably large Houston area outage events reported in recent days, continue restoration operations after storms. Wind and cold hazards this week increase outage and road safety risk in affected regions. Utility and county emergency bulletins remain the best real-time sources. Shutdown-driven disruptions to data program flows. The government shutdown is delaying or complicating program funding in some economic area flows. That increases uncertainty for consumers, benefits recipients, and for businesses relying on timely federal payments and contracts. Measles and vaccine preventable disease surveillance, elevated activity, CDC state surveillance. Pages updated in the past 24 to 48 hours show heightened measles activity in some jurisdictions this year. States are issuing guidance and targeted responses. No new national public health emergency was declared in the last 24 hours. Healthcare funding pressure, litigation, and federal funding decisions tied to shutdown threaten reimbursements for Medicaid healthcare providers in some states, a stressor to hospital cash flows and community health programs. U.S. posture on alliances and resources continues to drive trade diplomacy, recent high-level deals, critical minerals, and alliances in Asia, and U.S. relief military assistance for hurricane-hit Caribbean states have been prominent in the last 24 hours. Those moves shape domestic, industrial, humanitarian, and strategic resource planning. Global conflict and disaster pressures affect U.S. commitments. The U.S. is moving assets and aid for Caribbean hurricane response while also managing diplomatic priorities tied to Ukraine and the Middle East. These competing demands influence federal resource allocation and public messaging. Supreme Court emergency application filed by the administration live and expedited. That's on the Copyright Office case. Manhattan hush money conviction appeal filings remain active. Trump's legal team filed appeals and briefs in state appellate proceedings within the recent filing window. The criminal case appellate track continues to advance. Multiple suits over funding and deployments. The SNAP suit, 25 states, and other suits challenging deployments and agency actions are actively pending. Expect emergency motions and expedited hearings. Shock event headlines and conduct from Trump and his administration shock and legal. The emergency SCOTUS petition will allow removal of the Copyright Office director, which is one of the more consequential overnight moves legally. Separately, the 25-state SNAP suit escalates an immediate human impact crisis, possible hunger for millions. Both are high-impact shock items in the last 24 hours. Lewd and inappropriate conduct. No newly verified reports. Supreme Court docket. Keep an eye on that for any emergency grant or responses to the Emergency Copyright Office petition. What to watch. Federal court in Massachusetts SNAP suit emergency relief requests and orders could determine whether November benefits are paid. Appellate and district dockets on guard and federal force deployments. Chicago, Portland, and Los Angeles new emergency motions could yield rapid mobilizations or further judicial constraints. Local utility and county emergency bulletins in outage-affected areas, e.g. the Houston region and state CDC pages. Keep an eye on those for new measles reports, immediate human impact items. That is according to the D.C. Circuit Court. Federal judge temporarily blocks CFPB open banking rule. Why it matters, bank and fintechs just won an injunction that pauses consumer data portability rules. A win for incumbents that delays easier switching for millions and could reshape regulatory rollouts. Pull the injunction order and plaintiffs' briefs for industry messaging and timing. 3 U.S. cities quietly sued over conditional policing grants. Localities are challenging new federal grant conditions tied to policing operations. If successful, this could free up or block funding and reshape accountability levers between feds and cities. Grab the complaint for the specific legal theory, which conditions are contested. Appeals court paused a judge's daily appearance order for a top border official. This is the asshat, if I am not mistaken, who was doing Nazi salutes outside and also told ICE to mace children. The pause changes immediate oversight mechanics in a high-profile immigration use of force case. Procedural developments like this often presage negotiated remedies or further appeals that alter enforcement on the ground. Pull the appeals filing and original order to track compliance claims. Senior DOJ nominee told seniors he inadvertently misspoke about White House communications. Any ambiguity about White House DOJ communication policy is a governance red flag and fuels congressional oversight queries. This creates a reporting angle on politicization risks inside of the DOJ. Obtain his written responses and hearing transcript to quote precisely. DOJ fraud probe targets leaders in the black-led protest charitable networks. An active federal investigation into alleged donor fraud in major civil rights networks raises civil society accountability and funding transparency questions. Sensitive high-impact reporting territory, subpoena and warrant details, and which entities are affected would be key documents. This came from Spectrum Local News. Regional manufacturing data, Richmond Fed showing earlier weakness than headlines imply. A negative and weak Richmond Fed manufacturing read is an early indicator of real economy stress in the mid-Atlantic and southern region. Good for enterprise and labor beat follow-ups on layoffs, supplier stress, or export weakness. Regional manufacturing data, Richmond Fed showing earlier weakness than headlines imply. A negative weak Richmond Fed manufacturing read is an early indicator of real in the mid-Atlantic and southern region for good for enterprise and labor follow-ups and layoffs, supplier stress, or export weakness. Pull the full Richmond Fed release and underlying survey tables for more information. Large Houston area utility outage restoration still active after severe weather. Unresolved urban outages create cascading safety impacts. Hospitals, transit signals, food supply, and are a fertile beat for human impact stories and municipal accountability reporting. Use Centerpoint outage trackers and county emergency pressers for restoration timelines and mutual aid requests. State health pages updated with measles clusters in multiple California counties. Localized vaccine preventable outbreaks often precede wider spread. School exclusions, clinic surge capacity, and local immunization responses are immediate public health storylines. Pull the state DPH page and county health pressers for case counts and containment efforts. Former FBI director's legal filings expand a challenge to administration policy claims. Actions by high-profile former officials, e.g. Comey, seeking judicial clarity can reshape investigatory narratives and produce new documents or testimony useful for legal political accountability pieces. Pull the latest filing for claims and relief information. Here is the closing numbers for the stock market today. The S&P 500 down 1.03%. That is a significant drop. The stock market essentially crashed today. SPDR Dow Jones Industrial Average down 0.28%. Invesco QQQ down 1.49%. It looks bad. It's in the red on all, and it's like that. Here are the top U.S. trade and economic highlights from the past 24 hours. Donald Trump and Xi Jinping oh, geez. Wow, I can't read today. Donald Trump and Xi Jinping reached a de-escalation trade agreement during their summit in South Korea. The U.S. agreed to cut tariffs on Chinese goods from 57% to 47%, while China committed to resume large purchases of U.S. soybeans and agreed to pause rare earth export restrictions for a year. So what has been accomplished? Besides jack shit? I mean, before China was purchasing soybeans and then they stopped because of Trump's tariffs. And now they're purchasing soybeans again. Is there some sort of point to this bullshit? Why this matters, this signals a shift in U.S.-China trade tensions and may relieve some cost pressures on U.S. exporters and farms, though major structural issues remain unresolved. Implementation details, tariff reductions, shipment volumes, monitoring of China's commitments, and whether this translates into actual trade flows is something to watch. China committed to purchase 12 million metric tons of U.S. soybeans this season and to aim for 25 million tons annually over the next 3 years as part of the deal. Why it matters, U.S. farmers, especially in the Midwest, were hit by the prior trade war with China. This commitment provides relief for their export markets. What to watch, whether those volumes reflect new purchases or old commitments, timing of these deliveries, price implications for U.S. agricultural sector. The U.S. Federal Reserve delivered a 25 basis point rate cut to bring its target range to 3.75 or 4%, but Chair Jerome Powell signaled that a December cut is not guaranteed. Why it matters: the rate decision influences borrowing costs, business investment, consumer spending, and currency strength. The cautious guidance has market implications. What to watch: the Fed's next commentary, signs from labor and inflation data that may shift expectations and impact sectors sensitive to rates. Housing, autos, and credit, for example. Market reaction and signals: technology stocks slid, e.g. Meta Platforms dropped 11% amid weak earnings and concerns over AI spending. Bond yields and the U.S. dollar rose. Why it matters: investor sentiment is sensitive to trade and economic policy signals. Tech weakness combined with rate uncertainty may weigh on broader growth expectations. What to watch: whether the trade deal optimism offsets tech headwinds or whether broader market risks escalate. Experts caution the U.S.-China agreement is likely a truce and not a full resolution of structural trade issues, tech controls, intellectual property, and rare earths, for example, and that underlying tensions remain high. Why this matters: even with the apparent deal, lack of resolution on core issues means trade policy risk remains elevated for U.S. exporters, manufacturers, and supply chain planners. What to watch: congressional trade and court oversight supply chain shifts, e.g. firms redirecting production away from China, and enforcement mechanisms of the trade commitments. And remember, kids, the stock market is not the economy. Just because the S&P 500 or Dow Jones might be performing does not mean that wages are growing, jobs are secure, inflation is under control, or that people are thriving. Here's the upcoming hazardous weather outlook for the next few days. West Pacific, Mountain West, and Intermountain expect clear to partly cloudy skies, but nights will become notably cold, especially in higher elevations and mountain valleys where overnight lows may fall to around 0 degrees Celsius, which is 32 degrees Fahrenheit. That is exactly at the freeze point. Daytime highs moderate, 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit, 10 to 15 degrees Celsius, but the big risk is exposure to cold, potential for freeze impacting agriculture and equipment, and travel across mountain passes. Key risks: freezing overnight, cold exposure, road and bridge icing in the early morning, wind chill in exposed terrain. Central U.S., Plains, and Midwest, another region facing cold overnight lows. The forecast shows lows around 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Inland, Friday night, daytime highs will be in the 50s. Winds may pick up in the open plain zones, which combined with cold could stress outdoor equipment or mobile assets like aging machinery and irrigation systems. Freeze and frost overnight, infrastructure, pipes, exposed equipment, stress, travel risk early in the mornings, wind plus chill in exposed plains. South and southeast, daytime highs are mild, 60 to 65 degrees Fahrenheit, but nights drop into the near freezing category. In some inland parts, 32 to 33 degrees Fahrenheit. This is early for many areas to be exposed to a freeze risk. The Gulf and coastal zones will be less cold but vulnerable. Inland suburbs and rural zones should monitor key risks: unexpected freeze and frost in areas that don't always plan for freezes so early in the season, outdoor worker exposure, and potential for equipment and crop stress. Northeast and mid-Atlantic, daytime highs in the mid-50s. Friday, but overnight lows Friday and Saturday near 30 degrees. Wind chill may add further cold exposure. Tree and branch stress from earlier storms may still be a factor in high wind gust zones. Power lines and outdoor systems are vulnerable. Cold overnight, wind chill possible, power outage risk from tree and branch stress, vulnerable outdoor populations like homeless and transit users. And here are the top international news highlights from the past 24 hours. Donald Trump instructed the United States Department of Defense via the Pentagon to immediately resume nuclear weapons testing, ending a 33-year practical moratorium. This directive comes ahead of his meeting with Xi Jinping in South Korea. I was 3 years old when that moratorium kicked in. Why this matters? It marks a radical shift in the U.S. posture towards nuclear testing, potentially triggering new arms races, undermining existing arms control frameworks, and raising global strategic risk. Anybody who makes this world unsafe for others should remember that they make the world an unsafe place for themselves. What to watch, whether the tests are explosive or non-explosive, responses from Russia and China, and how U.S. allies and non-proliferation regimes react. At the U.S.-China summit in Busan, North Korea, Trump and Xi Jinping held a meeting in which the U.S. reportedly agreed to reduce tariffs and China pledged increased soybean purchases and improved access for rare earth exports. Simultaneously, the U.S. Senate passed a resolution to nullify the sweeping tariffs imposed on over 100 nations. Holy fucking crap, dude. Really? Over 100 nations? How many nations are there in the world? There are 195 countries in the world. Why it matters, it signals a major diplomatic trade shift between the world's two largest economies with reverberations for global supply chains, commodity markets, and strategic alliance networks. What to watch, implementation of tariff reductions, enforcement of rare earth export commitments, and how U.S. domestic politics responds, especially in manufacturing and farming states. Hurricane Melissa made landfall in Jamaica as a Category 5 hurricane, leaving at least 29 dead, including many children across Jamaica and Haiti. And widespread destruction of homes, roofs, and power systems. The storm is moving toward Bermuda. This is a major disaster event in the Caribbean with immediate humanitarian, infrastructure, and migration implications. U.S. disaster aid and regional stability are in focus. What to watch, relief aid, mobilization, power and communications restoration in Jamaica and Haiti, and secondary risks such as flooding, disease, displacement as the storm progresses. Financial and market signals. Global markets exhibited muted reaction to the major geopolitical moves. Nuclear test directive plus trade deal. As investors remain cautious, the U.S. dollar strengthened and long-term yields rose in the wake of the policy shifts. Why it matters, market behavior suggests that despite big headlines, many investors are treating this as a repositioning rather than a full rally, which may indicate underlying caution about structural risks. What to watch, how commodity prices, especially rare earths, soybeans, for example, respond, and whether bond markets price in higher strategic risk or inflation from the trade and tariff changes. Overall themes and risks. A strategic reset appears underway. The U.S. is signaling tougher posture. That would be nuclear testing, while simultaneously offering trade production concessions. China deal. Arms control and supply chain anxiety. The nuclear test moves and rare earth trade deal are interlinked. Resource security, defense posture, and trade policy are converging. Climate shock vulnerability. The Melissa disaster underscores how rapidly escalating natural hazards in the global south demand U.S. regional attention and humanitarian investment. Financial markets are cautious. Major headlines, but tempered investor response may reflect risk management mode rather than full optimism. The Trump administration slashes refugee admissions to 7,500 and prioritizes white South Africans. The U.S. published a Federal Register notice limiting refugee admissions to just 7,500 for fiscal year 2026, down from 125,000 under the previous administration, and stating the majority of admitted refugees will be white South Africans. No detailed rationale was provided, beyond it being justified by humanitarian concerns or otherwise in the national interest. This is a sharp shift in U.S. refugee migration policy with implications for asylum systems, international humanitarian commitments, and U.S. morale, soft power standing. How do you think this makes us look on the global stage? We got people doing Nazi salutes, and Trump's all trying to migrate white people here. while engaging in war crimes on domestic soil and in the Caribbean. Are we going to get bombed? Are we going to get bombed by Trump? That's a better question after reading today's news. You gonna nuke the United States? Asshole? What the fuck? How do you think this is gonna go for our international relations that all of a sudden the United States is wanting to do nuclear testing and shit while this motherfucker has literally pushed tariffs on half of the planet, is trying to bring a bunch of white people here. They're engaging in all kinds of crazy ass scary shit, like trying to lock people up and shit, and fucking doing Nazi salutes and shit. How do you think this is gonna go? This is a sharp shift in U.S. refugee and migration policy with implications for asylum systems, international humanitarian commitments, and U.S. morale, soft power standing. Let's watch how international refugee agencies act, whether litigation or NGO challenges emerge, and how this affects refugee flows and U.S. obligations under existing accords. Global growth outlook lowered by the International Monetary Fund, IMF, APEC region included. The IMF published updated forecasts for the APEC region. Growth expected at 3.1% in 2025 and 2.9% in 2026, down from 3.7% previously, with inflation hovering near 2% for APAC countries. The report also highlighted high public debt burdens in many economies, 110% of GDP for some, and stressed policy priorities, fiscal consolidation, financial stability safeguards, structural reforms, and redressing imbalances. Slower growth in a major economic bloc implies weaker global demand, which feeds back into U.S. export markets, commodity prices, and multinational investment decisions. Responses from regional governments, APEC members, whether the U.S. adjusts its trade tariff strategy accordingly, and how markets interpret this slower growth signal for global trade. Donald Trump, with his illegal tariff policies, is quite literally crashing the global economy. That is all. This concludes today's news report. We'll see you later. Everybody stay safe out there.
So the Olympics is great. And Johnny, for the others, you know, the World Cup, Johnny is the head of it. We had our top people, Wasserman. They all came in on the Olympics, and then I saw Johnny. And we got the World Cup too. And you know, it's only because they rigged the election that I'll be your president representing you there. You know, I got both of them. I got the Olympics and I got the World Cup. And I said, you know, it's too bad. One was in 2026 and the other was in 2028. And I said, I won't be there. I won't be your president. But then they rigged the election and now we won. So I'm going to be your president for the Olympics and for the World Cup. So, Johnny, thank you for the World Cup, and everybody, thank you for the Olympics. We're going to have a great time.
Hey guys, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment to my videos. And also, don't forget to check out my shop where you could get this awesome Real Patriots Punch Nazis t-shirt. America, fuck yeah! And if you go to the link tree in my bio on most platforms, it's got links to everything, all of my stuff. You can find my shop there. I'm on eBay. You can also get this cool Exterminate MAGA sticker, because MAGA's fucking cockroaches. And fuck MAGA, abolish MAGA, fuck you MAGA.